This is Inspirational Women, a weekly series shining the spotlight on female trailblazers making a true difference in our community. Once again, here is Kate Daniels.
Nancy Shear embodies inspiration, and we are so fortunate that she has written her memoir, I Knew a Man Who Knew Brahms, as her stories provide the insights and encouragement we all need in our lives. Nancy Shear, good morning, and thank you so greatly for being with us this morning.
Oh, I'm delighted. I'm so happy to be with you.
You know, this memoir that you've written, I Knew a Man Who Knew Brahms, is on its own just such a great conversation to have. But the fact that we're doing this in March during Women's History Month, I think just underscores so much of women, of who you are, what you've done, and really the kind of pathway, the model that it demonstrates for any of us to be able to live our own best life.
It hasn't been easy for women, myself included, and that's a big part of the story, and I hope that's changing now.
Yes, we do hope that, and I think part of what's involved in that hope is hearing each other's stories. Stories are just so powerful and have their own kind of encouragement, and I certainly felt that in this book, how you at a very young age, really started to pursue your passion, and, just in doing that, what you created. I just marveled at how people did, and they were these men in the music scene, in the orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, who took note, and that really, to me, spoke volumes about your persistence and their being able to see that.
They were wonderful. If my connection to them had been in any way violated, I would have been shattered. It would have been, and this is, I have a really good idea of what these women who were abused by Jeffrey Epstein, and it goes on, and through the years by other people. It's a violation of everything about your life and who you are. And I had 120 people, men, in the Philadelphia Orchestra who took care of me, who protected me, who taught me and encouraged me, and that's really it's a very beautiful thing, and that formed really a foundation for my life, and I'm so incredibly grateful to them, and that's why I dedicated the book to the men and women of the Philadelphia Orchestra then and now. But I'd like to think that there are other groups of men in power who would respect and take care of a young woman.
And that really came across so strongly, how they, and it wasn't just one, that there was a group of them who just were very protective of you, very attentive, in their own little spheres or positions, would be watching. You would see this, and it was only later that you would understand that they were really looking out for you in terms of other certain men who were on the set. Yeah, exactly.
And the great part of this is that this was one of the greatest orchestras, if not the greatest orchestra in the world. And these individuals, because, an orchestra is a miracle. Every time I go to a concert, even now after all these years, and I see the orchestra on the stage, and then the lights dim and the conductor comes out, and it's always a miracle to me that you have these 100-plus people who come together for the sole purpose of the art and bringing this music to life. And I think it's just phenomenal. So these lovely human beings who, in effect, took care of me were highly, highly accomplished musicians. All of them could have been soloists in their own right, and they came together for music. But it had extra meaning for me that they were so accomplished and such great artists, in addition to being wonderful human beings. I was lucky.
Well, luck would be one way to look at it. Good fortune, maybe that's the same as luck. Or maybe it just attests that there are many good people in the world. Yes, there are bad actors, bad apples, but to find the good that exists, and you did find it.
Yeah, I did. But again, I think, I could have been very attracted to a group whose individuals were not quite so wonderful as this orchestra. But I want to go back to what you said, which was wonderful about stories, because that's what the book is. It's really stories, and I hope people will get a lot of insight about music, because I meet people all the time, and they'll say, "Oh, I would love to go to the local orchestra's concerts, but I don't know anything about classical music." And it's sad, because people go to restaurants, they may not know a lot about food, but they eat and they enjoy it. They go to art galleries or museums, and they're able to look at the paintings and the sculptures and enjoy it without feeling that they don't know enough to be there. And I don't know what it is about classical music where people say, I can't go in there because I don't know, I may not be dressed properly, and I don't know the etiquette, and I don't know anything about the composers. It doesn't matter. So I hope the stories that I've told will enable people to open that door, go into the concert hall, and have a wonderful time, because they belong there as much as any professional musician or music critic does.
Well, you certainly do present it in that way, because you just simply loved music. So I guess it comes from that point of view. I think the majority of us love music. Maybe you don't think that it is classical music that you would like, but and there's such a gamut of different kinds of classical music. So I know here locally with the Seattle Symphony, they certainly do lend themselves to want to try a broad repertoire to really appeal to people. And the way then that you share your experience, Nancy, in this book, I Knew a Man Who Knew Brahms, you just started because you were so intrigued with the music and started so young, a young teenager sneaking in. I mean, that's just incredible how much you loved music that you would sneak in there.
Well, I felt it was a moral thing to do, that I wasn't doing anyone any harm. I could not make the choice between sneaking in or buying a ticket, because I didn't have any money. So it was either sneak in or don't go. And so I wasn't doing anybody any harm. I wasn't cheating anybody else out of a seat. I felt, in a way, that, gee, if they were empty seats, that would be great for the orchestra, too, because they'd have more people in the house. So I was able to figure all this out and keep it highly ethical, which it was. Again, it wasn't like I was stealing anything. I wasn't. Nobody would have been in that seat if I had not been there. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was ethical, but it was the sound of the orchestra, and that's what absolutely possessed me and gripped me, and I just had to get into those concerts. And I just said to a friend of mine, I said, there was no door or lock strong enough to keep me out of the concert hall. And eventually, the route that allowed me to penetrate that beautiful Academy of Music in Philadelphia was through the stage door. And that's a whole other thing. But I got to meet all the musicians. I got to meet the conductor. And there I was, I was 15 years old, and I started to go into the concerts. And I loved to kind of prowl around the building, because it had been built in 1857. And it was gorgeous. It was modeled after La Scala, so it was just this world of gold and red velvet, and it was just so elegant and so beautiful. And when I got into the concert hall, actually Eugene Ormandy, the conductor of the Philadelphia Orchestra, saw me waiting outside the stage door, and I was there only to see if somebody had an extra ticket. And he took me in, and as I write in the book, that it was not just getting into that concert, but in doing so, I had learned the layout of the backstage area. So I knew if I could get in through the stage door past the guard, I could bypass the ticket takers. And one day I was looking around the building backstage, and there was a doorway. It's a wonderful story. It was a green metal door. And I opened the door just out of curiosity to see what was in that room, and there were two men sitting at a work table. One was the assistant conductor, William Smith. The other was the orchestra librarian, Jesse Tainton. And I got scared when I saw them, so I started to close the door. And the librarian very sweetly said, "You may come in." So I opened the door again, and I walked in. And he kind of smiled at me. He said, if you want to see what I'm doing, pull up a chair. I mean, imagine this. And that was it. So every day after school, I would run there, and I'd watch what he was doing. And it was fascinating because, if I may, just tell you a little bit about what an orchestra librarian does.
Yes.
I find it fascinating. But the music that is on the stand for the conductor and each of the players individually, they have their own music. That's what the composer wrote, but there has to be other markings in those parts to enable the conductor to realize his or her own interpretation, how he or she wants the music to be played. And that's the job of the orchestra librarian. So it's people think it's about filing and cataloging music. It's not. This is about actually working with conductors to put their markings in the parts that will help the players understand what the conductor wants. And so that's what I did. And I started to go there a couple times a week. So I would watch the librarian. And when I was 17 years old, and by that time, they were used to my coming into rehearsals, and I would hang out backstage and talk to the players, which was a magnificent education, not just about music, but about life. And one day I was at a rehearsal, and I said to the librarian, "How are you?" And he said, "Not so good." I remember that vividly. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Well, my assistant quit unexpectedly." Well, I had, without realizing it, I had served an old-fashioned apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Here I am." And he laughed. He thought it was sort of a joke. He said, "Well, if we want you, if we need you, we'll call you." Well, I went home, and the next afternoon, he called my home. And my mother said, "Mr. Tainton's on the phone." And I picked up the phone. He said, "If you want a job, get back here." That was it. I was 17. I was still in high school. And I was working for the Philadelphia Orchestra. It's really a fairy tale in a way.
Yes, that was my thought. Like, how does this happen? But because you had this passion, and it was obvious that you loved this. It wasn't that you're just this pesky kid hanging around. No, you just really were absorbing it all, and they could tell this relationship had developed.
Yeah, and I think maybe I was a symbol to the players of the next generation, and that a young person could love what they're doing so much. It was such a motivation that I would actually sneak into the concerts. I think they really, in a way, saw me as the next generation, and I think it meant a lot to them that a young person would care so deeply about what they were doing.
Oh, yes, yes. And that makes such great sense, because we think of, jumping ahead to today and whether this younger generation really has that same kind of desire and appreciation. But we do still, in some cases, not as much as we ought to, we do have school music programs, school orchestras. So there's a little of that happening.
Yeah, there is. Not enough.
Right.
Not enough. But, I want to stress something, too, because I love the title of your show, Inspirational Women. And in those days, I had a monumentally wonderful role model and, in effect, teacher, and that was Eleanor Roosevelt. She died when I was 16 years old. She died in 1962. And I remember her speaking on television. She was being interviewed frequently. And then I became fascinated by her. And she was an incredible role model, because when I found out more about her life, not just her work, because what she did for humanity was remarkable to this day, for the underprivileged, for people of color, for women. I can go on and on. What she did was remarkable. But when I started to find out about her life and what she had to overcome, and the rejection from her mother, and her beloved father being an alcoholic, and her very disturbed, difficult uncles, and her life was, especially her childhood, was right out of Dickens. And so that she has served as an inspiration to me, my early days to this day. Very, very spiritual figure. So I hope people will continue to pay attention to her. She sort of dropped into an area of forgotten historic people, but it's just been a huge inspiration for me that she was able to function on the level that she did and overcome her fears and overcome feelings of anxiety and feelings of not being worthy. And she overcame that really for the benefit of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we all need some inspiration, and she has always served as inspiration for me.
Yes, I do admire her, and I love to find her quotes, and in simple phrases, there's just so much that she says and that makes an impact on who we are and what we need to be today. So
You're absolutely right, Kate. Absolutely.
with how you were sharing about her too, it made me think about your younger years had their challenges, and you were fortunate to have the music, and then you had the orchestra family. But here we see how the arts can really fill a need where there can be such pain and such disharmony going on in a young person's life.
Yeah. Yeah, I came from a home that was very difficult. My mother, who was the most wonderful, dear, loving human being, and loved classical music and introduced me to it. But she had her challenges. It was either, and I've never known the difference, she was either mentally ill or emotionally ill, but a tremendous amount of anxiety and depression. And I, being an only child, I was incredibly close to her, so that was very difficult. And my father had a violent temper, and there was a lot of yelling and let's say discord in the house. And that's tough for a kid, especially, I think, an only child. So the music really did help me. Now, if I had been from a happy, functional family, I don't know, I tend to think that the music still would have had been a beautiful part of my life and an essential part of my life. But it certainly did help with a difficult childhood.
And you were able, and who knows if things had been different in a happier home life, if you would have been necessarily sneaking into the orchestra and learning about being a librarian, because it then became your career for 20 years.
Well, yeah, I did the orchestra library work for it was about 20 years, but I'm still in music.
Yes.
And it's funny because when I was a kid and I was talking to members of the orchestra, I would say to them, "How long have you been in the orchestra?" And they'd say, 47 years. And I think, how can anybody not become bored? How can anybody do pretty much the same thing or work in the same area for that long? And now I know, because I started in Philadelphia Orchestra hired me in 1964. I mean, do the math.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about a long time ago. It's more than 60 years.
Yes.
And I'm still so fascinated, and I'm still learning. So, yeah, it's wonderful. But if I knew definitely that I had more than one lifetime, then I would do nothing but write and read and write. But I don't know that, so I still have one foot in the music business.
And that's the thing, we don't know, but you take what you have in front of you, and it obviously was very fulfilling, but it led, to your other work, to creating your arts company and still working with music and broadcasting and teaching. So you've had an incredible career.
Yeah, it's really been wonderful. And, I just want to reach young people because they need to know that if somebody says no to them, that's just the beginning. And that's really the point that I was hoping I was making, too, with the book, that if somebody tells you can't do something, you have to challenge them. And there's always more than one way to get what you want. And if I hadn't gone in through the stage door, there would have been other ways to get into the concerts. So I don't like seeing people become discouraged too easily. Yes, it's difficult. It can be brutal. And you get a little bit tired as you get older. I'm learning that. So, but I think that the lesson is, too, that if you really want something and you want to do something and you want your life to matter, there are ways to do it. There are a lot of ways to do it.
And look to your passion. Obviously, music, the classical music was so important to you. So you pursued that, and other doors open, and you become aware of other things. And I think that's it, is find what you're passionate about and really begin to take the steps in that direction.
Yeah. And one of the stories I left out of the book is about my radio career. And I started in Philadelphia. I I was working at the Curtis Institute, and one of the writers with the Philadelphia was either the Inquirer or the Bulletin when Leopold Stokowski died, and he was a dear friend of mine and a massive figure in my life, and of course a towering figure in classical music, even today. And I got to know him very, very well. We were very close, and I worked for him. But when he died, one of the music writers at the newspaper called me. They knew that I had known him, and said, can we do a story about your relationship with Stokowski? I said, of course. And that story broke, and my phone rang, and somebody at a music club in a Philadelphia suburb said, do you lecture? I had never given a lecture in my life, and I remember saying, yes. And she says, well, what do you charge? I didn't know what people charge to do a lecture. And this was a women's club. And I said, well, what do you pay? And I remember she said $50. I said, what a coincidence. That's what I charge. So I made an outline to do a lecture, and I got in my little Volkswagen Beetle, and I drove to the area just to do kind of a test run to see where it was, because I was a little bit nervous about it. And then the night of the lecture, I went there. It was the easiest thing I had ever done. I just loved talking about music and about Stokowski. And then I decided I wanted to get more lectures. So I made up, we didn't have computers in those days, so I got graphics from a book, and I cut them out, and I made a brochure to get more lectures, and I sent it to everybody, including the local radio station, which was an NPR station. And I got a call from the top person, very highly respected figure in public radio. And he said, well, we don't need a lecturer, but would you consider doing interviews? I said, I'd love to do interviews. So I did some interviews, and then and I did several for the radio station. I met some wonderful people. And then I finally, after 22 years of wanting to be in New York, I was able to move to New York. When I got here, I called the people in Philadelphia. I said, do you know anybody in New York radio? And this one person, a producer, whom I called, and had a reference from a Philadelphia station. He said, we don't need anybody. I said, well, I host and I interview. And he said, we don't need anybody. I said, well, can I send you a tape? And he said, no, because we don't need anybody. And he was sounding a little bit annoyed. So I said, okay, but thank you very much. Well, I got off the phone and I sent him a tape because he said no, but what did I have to lose? Postage for the tape? And 1 week later he called and he said, how would you like to host concerts live? And my first one was from the Frick collection, and that was it. And then I got my own show. So again, there are ways to get through to people and to get what you want in a nice way. He didn't have to call me. He could have said, hey, this woman is a pest. I don't want to deal with her. But sometimes you just have to keep at it and find another route in.
Yes, and he was wise. He likely listened to your tape and realized, oh my gosh, this woman is so phenomenal, so natural at this. She must work for us. So, yeah, not taking no for an answer, just following your heart.
And I worked with that man. I won't say his name because
Okay.
He may not like it, but I worked with him for a long time, and he was a total delight to work with. When I had his voice in my headphones, there was just such a feeling of security. I've kind of lost touch with him now. But no, I didn't. I wanted to do radio, and if he hadn't been in touch with me, I would have been in touch with other people.
These are the stories. They're just delightful, but they teach us so much. I mean, there's so much encouragement, and we can see how to apply it in whatever area of our life we are working in. And in your book, this is the way you are. It's so natural. It's so readable and relatable in that way that it's just such an intriguing read. So I am so grateful that you had made the decision that you were going to write this story, Nancy.
Thank you. I was compelled to do it. It wasn't even a decision. I really don't remember the moment where I decided that I was going to write it. I think I have a chair from the Academy of Music, 1857, and when they got new chairs in the Academy, the stagehands ripped out the one that I had speaked into all those years, because it was pretty much behind a pole, and so nobody wanted to buy a ticket for that chair. And they ripped it out, and they presented it to me, so I still have it. I'm in New York, and there's my wonderful chair sitting there. And it's an interesting chair because it's wood, but it's the legs are very short because it was on a riser, because the top balcony was sort of terraced. And one day I started to think, how would I describe this chair? And I started to write about it. And that really, in a way, was the beginning of the book. And I wanted to continue the legacies of these wonderful people that I had worked with, especially, the great musicians of our time. And I decided at one point, I took care of my mother for many years. When she died, I thought, how can I really get this book started? And I thought going back to school would be a great way to do it. I had wanted to do that for 40 years. So I applied, I gave them all the material they asked for, and I went back to school when I was 65 years old. And I was older than some of the professors. I was older than many of the professors. But I learned so much, and my thesis, my graduate thesis, and I studied with Susan Cheever, who's a wonderful writer. She has a new book out, by the way. And Susan worked with me on the thesis, and that became the seed of my book. My book grew out of that thesis. But I hope nobody thinks that they can't read the book because they don't know enough about music. Everything is defined. Everything is explained. But again, it's all stories.
Yes.
And no one, I hope, will ever close that book and say, well, I didn't understand what she meant in one sentence. I really tried to smooth everything out and bring everybody in and explain as I went along.
Yes. That's why I think it's so readable and relatable. It's encouraging, and it's so applicable to whatever, because it is entertaining, because you do explain it, and I would have to just say it's fascinating. And we owe it to ourselves, I think, to read this book, and we can pick it up very readily. Any of our favorite book sources.
Yeah, I'd really love to support these independent bookstores. And but they're being gobbled up by a lot of the larger stores. But I want to say something too about some of the larger bookstores really serve as community centers. So it's not completely negative. I happen to be delighted that the small bookstores in New York have my book, but so do Barnes & Noble. And we have the Strand in New York, and in fact the book is in the window. But some of the larger bookstores also, they have author talks and they have cafes, and there's kind of a community feeling. So I don't consider it quite as negative to buy a book at a large bookstore. But certainly I love when people support the smaller independent stores that are really struggling. But the book is available on Amazon, and I hope that if people want to support their smaller independent stores, they can ask them to stock the book.
Yes.
It's distributed by Simon & Schuster.
And to follow you, you have a website so that we can just keep up to date on what's going on.
Yes, my website is just my name. It's nancyshear.com.
This has been so delightful. I so enjoy speaking with you, and I just appreciate you, and perhaps we'll have a chance to have another conversation. We'll find some aspect of just women or careers or just pursuing your dreams.
I would love that. This has been such fun.
Thank you for being here this morning to meet these special women, providing us information and insights to create a better self, a better world for all. Please check this station's website for the podcasts for more information about these guests, and please share the stories with your family and friends. I'm Kate Daniels. If you'd like to connect with me, simply send me an email, katedaniels@hubbardradio.com. Allow curiosity to lead you on some adventure today.
Thank you for listening to Inspirational Women. Tune in every Sunday morning at this time to hear about those truly empowering the Northwest community, all for the greater good. Sunday Morning Magazine and Inspirational Women are a public service of Hubbard Radio Seattle.